I think what I did learn, and we learned as we went from the creators, is how beautiful and rich the history is.
When I was a teenager, I got really into tales of like knights and love stories. Like I can feel the inspiration of that in the piece, in the game.
She's slightly genderqueer in that like people mistake her for being a boy and a man, and she's like, yeah, great.
So anyone who's wanting to like live at their best 14th century Italian knight life will love it.
Mayel embarks on this crazy journey. She chooses to leave a life that wasn't serving her. And I did that a few years ago. And I chose instead a life that was authentic, a life that was neurodivergent.
1348 Ex Voto is a third-person action-adventure game set in the late Italian medieval period, wherein you control a knight-errant on a quest to save a princess. Despite claiming a degree of realism on account of drawing inspiration from historical European martial arts and classics of the genre, I would posit that's also a fantasy game, as the knight in question is a 90-pound ugly lesbian who spends the entire game slaughtering grown men and cutting for armor like it's paper, and as such, I would suggest you not support this product as it's little more of an ideological propaganda. I understand that last statement may seem contentious. After all, the enemies in the game refer to the main character as a boy, despite her physically resembling a woman, minus the hair. Regardless, on the assumption that the main character is indeed a biological female, we return to the thesis of this video. 1348 Ex Voto is obviously propaganda. It's woke, to use the term. Even if you removed the homosexuality, anyone with eyes to see and a minute to spare would reach that conclusion after viewing the trailer. Some, however, would argue that this is untrue, that historically gaming has always had strong women, and if you take exception to this title, well, you're just a whiny, loudmouthed chud who hates women. My personal beliefs on the fairer sex aside, the average tourist may consider that a reasonable argument, as so-called strong women have existed in games since Metroid hit the NES back in the 80s, and gaming has loads of capable women that really no one takes exception to. However, this doesn't account for the actual critique being expressed, which is that the true intention of a strong woman is to conflate her with a man. The protagonist of Ex Voto is, for all intents and purposes, male. She's as physically capable as any man despite being half their size. Her form is unfeminine and ugly, obviously not meant to invoke male desire, and above all, she occupies the role of a man, fighting danger and saving the princess. This is all evocative of feminist literature and beliefs, and while Ex Voto may be an extreme example, this is true of really all strong women in gaming, as seen in titles like God of War Ragnarok, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. The chud objection to Sadie Adler or The Boss is that they aren't really women, they're basically just men. And that's the point of this video, exploring the strong female psyop, the motivations behind it, and ultimately why it doesn't work, alongside why certain female characters are acceptable and why certain critics are full of shit. Now, to get the obvious out of the way, men and women are biologically different, with this leading to differences in psychology and human behavior. The male sex hormone testosterone makes it significantly easier for men to put on muscle mass, and it gives men a larger skeletal structure alongside denser bones, while women naturally produce the female sex hormones estrogen and progesterone, which are focused on regulating the body's health and ensuring a healthy pregnancy. The sex hormones also affect the mental state. A high T male is far more aggressive, confident, and motivated than a man with low testosterone, and as women are naturally low T, they're typically far less likely to be as physically inclined or as domineering as men are. Lots of mental health issues also relate to this. Depression in men is often connected to low testosterone, and excess T in women can make them emotionally unstable. The reality is that this is where things like gender roles come from. Men are expected to be confident, physically capable, and in charge because it's hard-coded in our DNA. Likewise, women are expected to be nurturing, supportive, and family-oriented as their primary sex hormones are centered around reproduction, with excess testosterone directly interfering with that process and causing infertility. I'm sure that was all very obvious to anyone who hasn't been totally mind-raped by modernity, but I felt the need to lay that basic framework down as these simple concepts that I imagine even children innately understand to some degree were apparently too difficult for some of the greatest feminist thinkers to grasp. Take Simone de Beauvoir's 1949 book The Second Sex as an example, wherein she argues that female behavioral patterns aren't innate but taught, and that while biological differences do exist, a woman's role isn't naturally born from those differences, rather society tells a woman what she is. This sentiment was heavily expanded upon in Kate Millett's 1970 book Sexual Politics, wherein she details how women are suffering under the constraints of a system of male dominance known as patriarchy. In fact, the oppression is so bad, they don't even know they're suffering. In fact, they're actually happy. Also, true female liberation involves homosexuality. After all, in the words of feminist icon Gloria Steinem, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. Never mind that a woman literally needs a man to fulfill her biological imperative, something that none of these women did. In fact, they were all bisexual. Beauvoir was a pedophile who groomed teenagers with her husband, and Millett shacked up with some Foyd after the Japanese guy she married to dodge his deportation died. Both of them cited Marxism in their writings. Millett was literally mentally ill, Steinem was a fed, and I'm tired of looking up feminist bullshit for this video when it's fucking stupid and obviously incorrect if you compare it to reality. Feminists somehow actually believe this shit. They'll take the words of a bunch of dead homosexual whores who never fulfilled the purpose of their existence on what a woman actually is, instead of following the model that really every major civilization ever has operated on, which just so happens to coincide with their biological inclinations. Feminists will listen to homosexual schizos, feds, and pedophiles rather than following their natural biological urges, something the aforementioned trio have zero experience with. This is obviously retarded, and yet that's the ideology that Voto plays into when it makes the female character a homosexual who is indistinguishable from a man, as the lesbian-dominated female liberation movements have always been about conflating women to men. This is why the later genderqueer and trans movements so easily adopted their talking points regarding intersectionality, so I guess Karma is a Norwooding bitch who goes by ma'am. I initially had a lot more to say on this, but in hindsight, I don't fucking care anymore, so let's talk gaming. Returning to the concept of strong Foyds existing in games since the start, while there is truth to that, you'll note that those characters were never conceptualized as the equivalent of men. Resident Evil is an example I often see cited. After all, the first game back in '96 offered a female campaign alongside the male one, and so did its sequel, while the third entry was female only with a male intermission in the middle. However, in the first Resident Evil game, Jill's campaign is significantly easier as she has more inventory space, she has better guns, she can pick locks, which further reduces backtracking, and a veteran of a force named Barry helps her throughout the game, while in Chris's campaign, you have to look after a female rookie named Rebecca, who will die if you don't save her. Really, the only advantage that Chris has is that he can take more damage, but he also fights more enemies, and on top of all of that, in certain versions of the game, it literally tells you that Jill's route is easy mode and Chris's is hard mode. Resident Evil 2 applies this gendered difference narratively, where Leon's route centers around Umbrella's involvement with the outbreak. It's his first day as a cop, and by the end, he's fighting bioweapons and miscegenating with an exotic oriental spy. Meanwhile, Claire begins her route searching for her brother, and as the game progresses, she comes to care for a young girl named Sherry, in the process clashing with Sherry's mutated father and essentially adopting her by the end of the game. In other words, Leon's campaign is an action movie, while Claire's is far more domestic. Granted, she also fights zombies, but her motivation is distinctly feminine, and on that, just like Jill in the first game, Claire's arsenal includes the overpowered grenade launcher, which can trivialize combat encounters, while the men rely on conventional small arms like shotguns and revolvers. The third game also does something similar narratively, where Jill is a survivor, and Carlos is a mercenary sent in by Umbrella to kill zombies and rescue civilians. The Carlos sequence begins right after the clock clock tower nemesis fight, where after carrying Jill to safety, he then shoots up a few Umbrella facilities with his AR in order to obtain a T-virus vaccine to save her. While the rest of the game is inventory management and survival horror, Carlos in general is far more action-oriented, saving Jill numerous times and successfully solving his problems by shooting them. Carlos is given a decisively more masculine role in the game, just like how Leon investigates a conspiracy while Claire looks after a child, or how the difficulty screen in RE1 is a gender reveal party, which is also true IRL. The point I'm making isn't that the original Resident Evils were super based or anti-woke. You know, that's Code Veronica.
Pilot mode. I can't switch over to manual control.
As we all know, back in the day, all around the world, women had to fight extra hard for their basic human rights to be acknowledged by their male peers.
Cross-dressing freak!
The point is that Resident Evil has always acknowledged biological differences and the results of sexual dimorphism. The series has never treated men and women as equals. The female protagonists are capable but also distinctly feminine, hence why in the third game, Jill is dressed like a prostitute, and the games have heavily emphasized Claire's ass since '98. More on that later. Compare Claire's motivation in RE2 to the main character and her goals in Voto, and I think you get the idea. This applies to loads of strong female characters like Sadie Adler from RDR2, who overpowers and tosses around grown men despite the obvious physical differences between them. Really, her whole arc is unnatural. Her husband was murdered, and as a result, she becomes this mega badass who's comically bloodthirsty. By the end of the game, she's this accomplished bounty hunter who's furthering the plot, while John is shoveling shit getting bitched at by his nagging wife who leaves him and only comes back after he builds a house with the aid of a black Amerindian. Every now and then some retard will say, you only hate this character because she's a woman. Which, yeah, if Sadie was Sam, slaughtering outlaws to avenge his wife, then this would all be reasonable, as he'd have the physique to match his hatred and the testosterone to keep him going. Sucker Punch's Ghost of series is a great example. Tsushima came out in 2020, and it's this samurai revenge story about a man losing his honor to protect his family and homeland. And then Yote was announced, and it's this stupid bitch a quarter the size of a man she's cutting down. She's voiced terribly by an ugly non-binary shitlib who identifies as Antifa, and the game's head dev cheered the murder of a guy with comically tame politics compared to your own. And then retards online are like, yeah, I mean, that all sounds reasonable. If you don't like that, you're just an incel, okay, Chud?
Shut your bitch ass up, bro. Like, you're only saying this shit is cringe because it's a woman.
Yes! It is cringe because it's a fucking woman.
Got him. We fucking got him.
I don't think I stuttered when I made that fucking point, dipshit. That was the entire point I was trying to make. It's fucking cringe because it's a woman.
Good God, have you ever talked to a woman before?
Yes, I've talked to women before. No, I don't need your help.
Was it during the birth canal? Or?
And you know, it's an open world Sony movie game. Frankly, it never began for Yote, but a male protagonist would have at least made the concept believable, whereas in the current iteration, I don't believe the main character would have made it past the prologue. I think you get the idea, but one more example is The Last of Us Part 2. There's a lot to object to with that game, and that all kind of masks the subtle retardation that is 90-pound Ellie traveling across the country on a revenge quest with her Jewish slut of a girlfriend, slaughtering scores of grown men to avenge the death of her father figure. This is an obviously male story, and therefore it makes total sense that, say, Tommy would set off to avenge Joel, yet despite that, Ellie has to convince him to avenge his own brother, and his role in the story is relegated to Sniper, who blasted Druckmann's self-insert, while Ellie's out there punching out men and stabbing pregnant women. And you know, that's supposed to be a bad thing, right? She's losing herself in her quest for vengeance. When she's 19 years old and weighs 90 pounds, it doesn't matter that she's packing a stiletto when Ellie is biologically not suited for the role the game puts her in. At least Abby was on enough gear to overdose a horse. She likely had more testosterone in her veins than every man of the series put together. Of course, that doesn't make it any less propagandistic, but I don't think I have to elaborate on the propaganda of a game about strong pregnant women fighting on the front lines, protecting trans kids from evil religious conservatives, which featured a guided tour through a synagogue wherein your Jewish GF, who's currently got an Asian baby inside her, explains the Holocaust for all these stupid goyim at home.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century.
So yeah, women are weak and biologically not suited for the role of men, not physically nor mentally. With that in mind, why do certain women get a pass while others don't? How come no one called Nier Automata woke, or complained about the women from Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy? The answer very simply comes down to the intention of these characters. Rather, that these characters are all intended as objects of desire. Now, to be clear, the argument is not it's okay because I can crank it. Rather, because these women are objects of desire, it cements the fact that the intention was to create a fantasy. Returning to the women of Resident Evil, Jill has jiggle physics in the 01 remake on the GameCube because the entire concept is a male fantasy. She's not meant to be empowering, and that's why she's dressed like a whore in the third game, while Claire has her feminine virtues emphasized even for polygons. I think Ada is the best example of this. She's a mysterious secret agent sent in to recover the virus, but her actual mission in the game is tempting Leon to betray his race, something she ultimately fails at as revealed in the latest entry. That's basically her role throughout the series, most obviously the case in the fourth game. There's literally zero reason for Ada to wear a skimpy red dress on a secret mission beyond the fact that it's a male fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Gaming as an industry was created by men for men. There is absolutely nothing wrong with making games that appeal to men. It's not a coincidence that the golden age of gaming was during a time when the industry as a whole accepted that fact. With that said, it's also worth elaborating on what exactly a male fantasy is. While eye candy is an obvious example, I mentioned Fire Emblem and Final Fantasy because the male fantasy provided by those games aren't necessarily as pornographic as, say, Stellar Blade or Bayonetta, but rather the strong women are both desirable and, in many cases, attainable for the male audience. Tifa from Final Fantasy VII comes to mind. She's the childhood friend archetype who's loyal with big tits, and she's obviously the correct love interest from that game. While she's also a badass martial artist, that's just additional flavor for the rest of the fantasy. It adds a tomboy spin to it. Now, if you made her an ugly, diverse, single mother and kept the martial arts stuff, then yeah, that'd be propaganda. An example is the brown assassin granny from Outer Worlds 2. But on a very basic level, Tifa is attractive, she likes you, and you can date her. As strong as she is, Tifa is an object of desire designed to appeal to the male gamer, and you realistically cannot compare her to the ugly lesbian from Voto, or really any female character who is interchangeable with a man. This also applies to Fire Emblem, a series with loads of female characters who have masculine roles and motivations, yet they're designed for a male audience. The Blazing Blade was the first Fire Emblem released in the West, and the first character you meet is a woman named Lyn. Her nomad tribe was wiped out, and the intro mission of the game involves Lyn fighting and killing a number of male bandits. The reason this isn't paused is because she does so in an oriental dress that, even with GBA graphics, you could see it goes up to her hips. While modern Fire Emblem is often written off as a dating sim, the older games also had elements of romance where you would pair units together and this would lead to variations in the endings. The idea was that the game itself is a war record of the conflict, something enhanced by the permadeath mechanics. While Lyn's generic endings include going home and spending time with her family, the obviously better endings include marrying her to one of the male characters. The previous game, set 20 years later, starring their children, builds upon this, wherein the main character is a teenage boy and his harem includes his childhood friend, a tomboy, an oriental, an exotic dancer, a dragon girl, and lastly, his teacher. With one exception, they're all fully clothed, and they're all physically capable women, and yet nonetheless, it is obviously a fantasy for men. In case this is all sounding a bit too Indian for you, the point I'm making isn't that hot women makes propaganda okay. The point is that hot women are designed for the male audience. It's a fantasy in the same way that a strong woman is a fantasy. It doesn't counteract the propaganda, rather it recontextualizes it as something intended for male enjoyment, which is true of gaming in general. That said, there is a degree of subjectiveness to this. A reasonable argument could be made that there's a hint of autogynephilia when you're dressing a female character as a slut and running around as her, especially if it's in first person. Other times, this can veer on cuckoldry. You see this a lot in anime, where the male protagonist is a total loser surrounded by his harem of strong women who do all the fighting for him. And beyond all of that, it's true that a game can still be fun despite its politics. Whether it's woke or not is a separate metric than the quality of the mechanics, and what you value more is ultimately up to you. Regardless, I do think that the underlying principle is correct. The Metroid series is occasionally called empowering by hack journos who don't deserve a job, as the female main character, Samus, is indistinguishable from a male one. However, beyond taking a maternal role regarding the baby Metroid in later entries, even in the 86 original, if you did well enough, you were rewarded in the end with pixelated titties. It's not meant to be pornographic, but it tells you that the intention wasn't some feminist bait and switch. The joke is that the guy you were controlling who killed all of his monsters is actually a hot babe. Later entries would unlock concept art, or Samus would be in the Zero suit rather than a bikini, but the idea remains the same. I'd argue this male fantasy component is really the most important part of strong female characters. You can have a feminine motivation, like a mother trying to save her children, and it could still be the most blatant propaganda you've ever seen, like a single mother version of Max Payne. On the flip side, so long as the woman in question is attractive and designed to appeal to men, I would say that adds a certain level of charitability. Again, it's subjective. You may tolerate more or less than I would, but broadly speaking, the dev who makes his game one-handed typically isn't flipping off the male gamer with the other. What really proves this thesis is its antithesis. Modern games are full of ugly, annoying, masculine hags that demean the male characters, who are really just stand-ins for the goy cattle male audience that bought the game. Even if there's romance, it is not a male fantasy. Consider Mary Jane from Insomniac's 2023 Spider-Man 2, wherein her jawline is stronger than Peter's and her body can only be described as masculine. Compare her design here to the first game for 2018. If you put a bag on her head so her comically ugly face doesn't distract you, take a look at the shoulder-to-hip ratio. A key difference between the male and female skeletal structure is the size and shape of the pelvic region. Women have wider pelvic dimensions in order to facilitate childbirth, while men have broader shoulders. This leads to a very common character design method where women have broader hips and slimmer shoulders. Sometimes the shoulders are about the same as the hips, resulting in an hourglass physique. But biologically speaking, women are designed bottom-heavy, and this transfers to character design in fiction. With all this in mind, take another look at MJ. Broad shoulders, no hips, square jaw, that is a man. And the game basically treats her like one as well. Not in a narrative sense. Narratively, she's Peter's nagging GF, and the climax of her is turning into a venom symbiote and then nagging him some more. In terms of gameplay, however, she's basically a man, going out with a stun gun, taking out squads of heavily armed men, and then shooting hordes of symbiotes in the finale. Yes, she's feminine in that she's Peter's love interest and she nags him a bunch, but this is not a male fantasy. It's a little more than a Floyd Writer's therapy session disguised as strong female propaganda. On that note, MJ is a good example of a certain phenomena I sometimes see the centrist libertarian right-wingers trot out when it comes to women in media, namely that no one has issues with strong women, rather it's the way they're written. No one complained about Sarah Connor or Ellen Ripley, and yeah, that's true. No one in those circles complained about those characters, but if they were being logically consistent, they really should. There's a number of quotes from the creators of Alien on how the crew was initially conceptualized as unisex, and there's even a quote from Ridley Scott on how he believes in the equality of men and women. That's propaganda, and so is Sarah Connor becoming some mega badass in Terminator 2. Terminator 1 did it right. She's a scared woman protected by men who barely makes it out alive. You can argue that it makes sense she'd do some training as a response to what she's learned. You could even call it good writing if you suspend your disbelief, as women aren't typically so measured after high-stress, traumatic situations. However, I don't see how you can deny that she's obviously taking a masculine role, and that exists regardless of context. It's not about the writing, as you can contrive really anything you want. Buffy has magical powers, and Eowyn is genetically stronger as she's an elf. Sarah Connor did some chin-ups, and Furiosa, I don't actually know the excuse for that one, but you see the anti-woke crowd jerk off Fury Road sometimes. Speaking of, the Critical Drinker has a video on the Furiosa movie wherein he praises the actress and says how she's wily and agile, which makes the combat scenes more believable. It is the writing argument. And while I do agree, as it would be less believable if she was body slamming grown men, this is the same movie wherein she's driving supercars and doing spec ops shit with a sawed-off and an SKS. The premise is she's getting revenge on her mother's killer, and at one point she escapes captivity by tearing off her mangled arm and escaping on a motorcycle, because she's just that badass. Drinker acts as if this in particular is maybe a bit much, but how's the rest of that not woke? He elaborates in a dedicated video on strong female characters, and again, it's all about the writing. Drinker talks about how fight scenes with good, strong female leads may include using the environment, surprise attacks, or improvised weapons to make up for biological differences. He directly cites Terminator 2.
Sarah Connor was an awesome kick-ass fighter in Terminator 2, but the film never tries to pretend that she's bigger or stronger than the men around her. Instead, she uses weapons, the environment, surprise ambushes, threats, and hostage taken to even the odds. And it works. You believe that she could actually accomplish the things she does, and the natural result is that you buy into her character more.
And you know, it is nice that Sarah isn't just punching dudes in the face, except for when she does, in a scene Drinker carefully didn't include in this montage, but she's also the Kyle Reese of the film. She went from the scared victim being hunted to the protector. She has literally adopted the male role from the prior film, and now she's a badass single mother, shooting guns and puffing cigarettes. She's basically a man, and if that's not woke, then what is? Centrist Lolberts like Drinker would point to Abby or Captain Marvel or whatever cape shit is currently making the rounds, and yeah, that is worse, but is this not still bad? In the same video, he acknowledges how the objectionable strong female character is essentially just a man, yet he somehow believes that putting a woman in the role of a man isn't contentious.
Either way, it all just smacks of overcompensation, a kind of knee-jerk reaction to all those overly emotional, easily frightened damsels in distress from previous generations of movies. A desire to break away from the tropes of women as caring, compassionate maternal characters or overly sexualized fantasy figures. Fair enough, there's absolutely nothing wrong with branching out and exploring different ideas. The problem is that if you take all those feminine elements away and replace them with nothing but the most stereotypical of male traits, then all you really end up with are women awkwardly pretending to be men.
So to clarify, Drinker doesn't contest the ideologically motivated replacement of female traits with male traits. His issue is that the female traits were replaced with the wrong male traits. The woke left didn't just turn women into men, but toxically masculine men, and that's a problem. He made a similar argument in his video defining wokeness, wherein he stated that strong female characters in themselves aren't woke, and that actually it's a good thing they exist.
There's also been plenty of lazy stereotypes of overly emotional damsels in distress, incompetent empty-headed bimbos, and overly sexualized fantasy figures. Needless to say, those ideas are dated and unrealistic. And the thing is, recent decades have seen a change in those attitudes, with more and more stories presenting women as strong, capable, empowered, and complex. Great stuff, and a well-deserved rebalancing of the scales. In short, having strong female characters in your stories isn't woke.
Well, the damsels in distress, empty-headed bimbos, and over-sexualized fantasy figures that he whined about are all distinctly feminine, while the strong women that he celebrates only differ from the ones he criticizes in execution. Of course, in this same video, he also states that
I think most sensible, level-headed people would probably accept two things. One, raising awareness of social, cultural, and environmental issues isn't a bad thing. Neither is encouraging people to look at the world from different perspectives, or giving historically underrepresented groups or problems a bit more visibility and attention, or trying to move beyond tired and damaging old stereotypes. The point I'm making here is that incorporating progressive themes and ideas into entertainment is no different than incorporating traditional conservative themes and ideas. They're both just perspectives that the audience is invited to consider.
So maybe it really shouldn't be too shocking that he jerked off award-winning anti-white film Sinners, specifically praising the twerking and crip-walking scene, as that's black excellence right there. That's the culture, white boy. White people don't even season day assault victims. Drinker then acknowledges that while the film is blatantly anti-white, to the extent that you'd be a fool for not noticing, the genetic hatred against his people was done so well that it actually enhanced his viewing experience.
One thing that also got people talking about this movie were the allegories with contemporary culture and racial politics, and honestly, if you can't see the obvious message behind parasitic white vampires infiltrating a prosperous and exuberant expression of black culture to literally suck the life out of it for their own benefit, then well, maybe movies aren't quite your thing. Seriously though, as much as Coogler clearly has something to say with all this stuff, it's integrated intelligently enough into the narrative that it actually enhances the film rather than detracting from it. It doesn't batter you over the head with its message, but instead invites you to consider what it might be trying to say.
We got money and we ready to spend it with y'all.
Sounding damn near perfect, and you're saying we ain't welcome.
No, I'm saying you get down that road, you get back into town. Plenty of white barrel houses down there.
This because we're... Can't we just, for one night, just all be family? You don't need to do that, sir. We'll be on our way.
And that's just fine by me.
People like this running the largest right-wing media channels is the reason why the right never wins culturally. It's the reason why modern-day conservatives are further left than Obama-era Democrats. They don't mind the blatantly subversive anti-white propaganda so long as it's done well. But, you know, Drinker can totally be trusted when it comes to talking about the message. If you've ever wondered why these guys never dig any deeper regarding the message or where it comes from, that's by design. If these people could plug themselves back into the Matrix, they would happily do so. If the bread was just a bit less stale, if the circuses were just that much more entertaining, they'd stop complaining and fall back in line like the cattle they are, but only after the discourse has been poisoned worse than the zog slop they gorge themselves on. Again, Drinker's contention isn't the cultural subversion or the ideology that actively hates him. In fact, he agrees with all that. His issue is the execution, it's the delivery. And if that's the case, then really, I'd say he's worse than a leftist, as at least they don't pander to a right-wing audience, shifting the Overton window to the point that actual right-wing positions are now extreme. Returning to Voto, on his gaming channel, Drinker made a video on the demo, in which he negatively describes it as 2026 gender and sexual politics awkwardly crammed into a medieval fantasy game, going on to say how gamers don't care about the message, they never did, and over the years that indifference has turned into genuine antagonism as they've been burned far too many times. You'll note that nowhere in this statement does Drinker acknowledge that he doesn't actually object to the message. In fact, he never actually gives his opinion. He says that gamers don't like left-wing propaganda, but caveats that it was awkwardly crammed in, and of course they're averse to it by now. But what exactly does that mean? If it weren't for Dustborn, the Chud gamer would be open to the message? What does that phrase even mean when Drinker says it? It was always a dog whistle, but the baseline assumption was that it referred to progressive politics. That's what woke actually means if you're not a centrist pussy. But if Drinker doesn't object to the politics themselves, then what is the message? It's like the Smiling Friends clip about a certain group of people, except Zach Hadel has acknowledged the realities of ethnic replacement despite surrounding himself with LA shitlibs in an industry in which it in no way benefits him to stick his neck out. It's the opposite case of Drinker, who built his career shitting on lefty politics, and yet the best he can do is a dog whistle that relies on your beliefs, which he doesn't share. If it seems like I'm really ragging on Drinker, that's because I don't like him very much. But also, I think he's the best example of the centrist Lolbert with a right-wing audience that somehow doesn't see the grift, even with something as basic as Voto. Like, you'll occasionally see videos on strong female leads from women, and they'll say something stupid, like how Sadie Adler is a good example of a strong woman done well. And yeah, that's retarded, but frankly, female creators are typically viewed more so as entertainment than sources of wisdom. Drinker, however, isn't wrong out of ignorance, he's wrong because he doesn't want to be right on this issue. He does not agree with the right-wing perspective, yet he makes videos on it anyway. The fact is, a woman serving in a male role is propaganda. This can be mitigated in various ways, but it's not about the writing or the execution, and it's not about Mary Sue's. If we take a look at some upcoming releases, you'll see what I mean. Take The Witcher 4 as an example. Ciri has magical powers according to the lore, so the combat may not bother normies, but how are we going to handle the romance? In every entry of the series, Geralt could get intimate with a number of ladies. I don't think the average male gamer is going to enjoy taking Ciri out to get fucked by a bunch of different guys, but even if it's a tame romance quest, it'll still feel pretty gay and frankly whorish. GTA 6 is another example of this. The tone is goofy enough that a woman blowing shit up and punching dudes won't be a deal breaker for most people, but what about going to strip clubs or hiring a hooker? The issue with these with female leads isn't the writing or the context, rather, the issue is biological. It comes down to sexual marketplace value and the politics of sex. On account of her biology, it would reflect very poorly on Siri if she did what gamers casually do as girls, and I think on some level everyone understands that, yet anti-woke creators will go on and on and on about the writing when the concept alone is objectionable. I spoke to a friend about this a while back and he phrased it quite well. He said that game devs today view the stuff as a mathematical equation where you can subtract a man and add a woman and the equation doesn't change, but it doesn't work that way because men and women are not interchangeable. This is the issue you always see with indie games, where it's that thing you liked 20 years ago, but female. You know, it's a gender swap of Duke Nukem, where the strong Floyd protag is spitting one-liners and acting like a man, and if you turn your brain off and consume, you can have a good time. But if you actually stop and think about it, is this not cringe and propagandistic? The rumored upcoming God of War starring Kratos' dead wife comes to mind. The whole point of God of War is that it's an ultra-masculine series where Kratos is ripping guys apart and fucking every woman in Greece. While the Norse duology reduced Kratos to a redditor with a soy beard who could easily solve his problems by beating his son, if this wife game even vaguely resembles the originals, then it'd obviously be inappropriate, as you're inserting a woman into a series that is the definition of male power fantasy. But she's a god, right? That was the justification for Ragnarok, when he had that stupid old bitch at the start dog-walking Kratos, except it was always a retarded argument as it ignores the point. You could have easily had a scene where she attacks Kratos but barely manages to scratch him, as he's the god of war, but the whole point of Freya is that she's a strong woman who overcomes her evil husband Odin, so why wouldn't she be able to take on the embodiment of masculinity and beat his ass? She's a god, she's just as strong, right? Why can't they do a game like the old trilogy starring Kratos' ugly wife, where she's beating the shit out of Norse gods and draining every man in Scandinavia, both of which are implied in Ragnarok? Again, everyone knows that would be distasteful, and it's because men and women are not the same. Yet, they don't apply this principle to any other scenario, like the intrinsically male concept of an action hero, and that's how you get critics like Drinker who can't honestly criticize obvious propaganda like Voto. I could go on for hours, but I think you get the idea, so let's wrap this up with really the best example of all this. The third Metal Gear Solid game, Snake Eater. Snake Eater features 2 female leads as part of the main cast. There's the femme fatale spy Eva, and then renowned super soldier the Boss. The former goes undercover as the lover of a defecting Soviet scientist named Sokolov, and when Sokolov is captured by the main villain Volgin, this allows Eva to shift targets to him while continuing her mission, which is collecting information on Sokolov's prototype Metal Gear. While Eva is more competent than your average man, comically so, she retains a distinctly feminine role in the story. She goes from Sokolov's lover to Volgin's toy to eventually Snake's woman, with a medical scan late in the game revealing that her time with Volgin left her with a number of injuries, including a destroyed rectum. The scan also reveals that she has breast implants, a crucial detail considering she has her titties out half the game, with which she uses to seduce Snake. Despite being, shall we say, overused goods, Eva is the love interest of the game, and Snake forms a connection with her throughout the campaign, saving her a number of times, and they share a romance scene after the final boss, with her letter to him serving as the ending monologue to the game. Again, Eva's a distinctly feminine character. She's a strong woman and all that, but it's part of the male fantasy. Motorcycle backflips aside, she's the princess to be rescued, and the player gets the girl in the end. She's desirable to the audience and attainable by the player. Eva is a very good example of a strong female character done right. By contrast, the Boss is the polar opposite. She's a woman in her 40s described as a legendary soldier and the mother of special forces, who not only stormed Normandy while heavily pregnant, but the game flat out states that the Allies wouldn't have won World War II without her. She witnessed atomic testing in the 50s. She was the first American in space in the 60s, immediately after which she was deployed during the Cuban Bay of Pigs invasion. She explains all this in a 10-minute diatribe at the end of the game, wherein she advocates for open borders globalism. As for her actual role in the game, she's the mentor of our protagonist, and she easily beats his ass 4 separate times using the special martial arts system that they supposedly developed together. This basically sums up her character as really anything that has to do with Snake. The Boss is just better. Snake gets knocked around and shat on by Volgin. Well, the Boss easily takes him out, and despite that, he trusts and respects her immensely. Snake has this ongoing rivalry with the enigmatic Major Ocelot, where by the end of the game, they come to understand each other as men. Well, Ocelot is actually the child the Boss gave birth to on Normandy. Her relationship with Eva is especially egregious. After a game's worth of Snake and Eva getting closer, he wakes up in the morning to find a note wherein she states states that she would have killed him, but she didn't. Not because she loves him, not because he saved her life, but because she made a promise to the boss. The rest of the game is spent explaining how not only was the boss one of the special instructors at a secret Illuminati school Eva was trained at, but the entire game was her final mission, as she never actually defected. She was the fall guy for Volgan Nuke in Russia. While history will remember her as a monstrous war criminal, and her comically prestigious career will never be known, she willingly bore the weight of the world because, in the end, she was a true patriot. There's really no way to describe how laughably bad this is. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game about the boss, not Snake. She's basically the greatest human being to ever live. She was at every notable event in history, and she threw it all away because she's just that noble and patriotic. I've seen a number of coping arguments in defense of this. One is that MGS was always over the top, and in the same game, Volgan's magically shooting lightning. Well, to my understanding, there's nothing to propagandize there. Meanwhile, the same can't be said for making the greatest soldier in the history of the world an uber-mentioned hag. It's just fucking stupid. When Eva talks about how a lesser woman would have been crushed by such a burden, and really every time the word she comes up in this monologue, I can't help but think what a massive cuck Kojima is. The game came out in 2004, by the way, and yet people talk about how everything got political after Occupy Wall Street or 2016, when mind-raping goy slop has been shoveled down their throats since at least the Second World War. The fact is, the boss is a man. This is a man's story, and the greatest soldier to ever live will never be a woman. If you made the boss a man, the story would significantly improve, especially as her role in the game is Snake's father figure. Except you can't make her a man because Kojima specifically wrote her as a woman. Giving birth on Normandy destroyed her body, while the atomic testing rendered her infertile. The point is, she gave everything a woman has for her country, and while traditionally speaking that would mean husbands, brothers, and sons, grifting libertarians have shifted the Overton window to the point that a super soldier woman giving birth on Normandy Beach and then winning us the war is somehow reasonable. Turning Eva into a fat, gay, black trans woman, now that would be too far, and the fact it didn't happen is worth making a video on. But the boss punching out Hitler? What's woke about that, huh, Chud?
She was a true patriot.
During World War II, she was the one who led us to victory in that war.
In June of 1942, the Cobras and I took part in the landing at Normandy.
Should have fucking stayed home! Grandpa! Should have stayed home! Should have stayed home! Have fun in hell, faggot! Have fun in hell, you fucking faggot!
Should have stayed home, you fucking piece of shit.
In conclusion, it's not about the writing, it's not about the nuance. It all comes down to biological reality. 1348 ex voto is obvious propaganda, and every mouth-breathing retard understands that. However, the only reason it exists is because the same people making videos don't give a fuck about the ideology behind it. And so, nothing ever happens. Women are weak, Kojima's a cuck, I hate libertarians, that's it, that's the video. See you next time.